we've heard today from side proposition is that we should leave Afghanistan on their own so they can develop their government on their own. However, we on side opposition today firmly believe, that without the ability to form a sustainable government, they will not be able to keep that sustainable government running. It is for that reason that we on side opposition today firmly oppose the resolution that this House believes that it is time for Afghanistan to govern independently of Western intervention. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the case of side opposition today. I will begin by refuting the 2 points we've heard so far on side proposition, after which I will move into my own 2 constructive points. The first being that no government is currently running, and that is problematic to leave Afghanistan when there is no government that is even running. And secondly, that it's hard for the government to run when they are still in wartime, and that the government is not used to running in wartime. So to begin, I will move into some brief refutation of what we heard from the first proposition speaker. The first point that we heard on side proposition was that sustainable change must be homegrown, and that it must be from the people, and that we need to let Afghanistan go through the trials and errors of forming their own government. Now they also mentioned that in the status quo, we've made little headway, and that they haven't carved out the future. And we believe that it's because they haven't carved out their future yet that that the Western intervention must remain in Afghanistan. Sure.
At what point, Rob, are you ever going to deem Afghanistan ready and able to function autonomously?
Well, as I'll be saying in my second point, Anissa, the fact is the Taliban is currently still in power to a certain extent. They still have power over their people. They still do have control over their country, and until they do not, we cannot even consider letting Afghanistan continue because they will not be able to continue to create a sustainable government. So the fact is, what we've seen is that, or what side proposition has been stated, is that we've already dealt with the Taliban, but what we see, ladies and gentlemen, is that the 2 main goals of Western intervention was to deal with the Taliban and to help lead them towards sustainability. We see that we haven't led them towards sustainability because the Taliban still exists, and that is why the Western intervention cannot currently leave. No thank you. Now the second point that we heard on side proposition was that a Western liberal democracy is not necessarily the best choice for Afghanistan. And they said that we would be forcing this democracy, these democratic values, on Afghanistan. But what we see is that the West has not always done this in the past. When we look to Kuwait, that as a monarchy, when we look to Saudi Arabia, which has a dictatorship, we find Western intervention does not always go to democracy, and we don't see how this would always occur. And in fact, they once again stated that the U.S. has gotten rid of the Taliban. We see that this has not yet occurred, and as such, we cannot simply leave them when the Taliban is still in power. No, thank you. And the final part of this point was that they have the right to govern as they like. And they mentioned that we rarely intervene unless there are great human rights abuses, like North Korea. But the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, North Korea, we don't intervene in North Korea because they have nuclear weapons and because we have fear of invading. So we don't see how that point stands. And that there's no one definition of the right way, we agree, but as I've already mentioned, Western intervention does not always force democracy, so we don't see how any of their points currently stand. So now I'll move into my own constructive case, beginning with the point that their government is not yet running. The fact is, the current government run by Hamid Karzai is a government in theory, but not in practice, because the fact is, the Taliban is, for all intents and purposes, still in power. The people are still fearing the Taliban. The people still look to the Taliban because they fear them. And because they still fear them, we cannot possibly think that they have a stable and running government. Sure.
Is Afghanistan the only nation that has issues with its government?
Well, no, they're not, but the fact is we are already in Afghanistan. We cannot leave until the job is done. We cannot leave until they can form their stable government, until they can go through trials and errors and end up winning and end up forming that stable government while the Taliban is still in power. They will not be able to. And as I will say in my second point, they haven't been able to. So the fact is, we need to look at what the intervention has done so far. There were 2 steps. The first was Taliban, the second was sustainability. We haven't moved on to the second, therefore we haven't dealt with the first. And leaving now would leave their government unprepared to work on their own. If we look to Egypt and Libya, where we left immediately, and we see what happens right now. In Egypt, we see that the loudest gun, not the loudest voice, is winning the day. In Libya, we see that they have no way forward. Egypt and Libya have no way forward because they don't have us to help them. If we left now, Afghanistan too would have no way forward. No thank you. The fact is, if we leave before Hamid Karzai and his government truly have power, Afghanistan will not be able to move forward and get the sustainability that I believe both sides today want to see happening in Afghanistan. No, thank you, which moves me perfectly into my second point, that the government can't run in wartime. They have been in war for the past 20 years, beginning with, or 30 years rather. The Soviet Union invaded, then the West invaded. They're not used to running stably. And the fact is, it is a foreign concept for their government to work stably. And what we've seen in Mexico with their drug cartel is that even a stable government cannot help when their country is in wartime and when they don't know, or when there is big fear arising in the country. We find, or we believe on side opposition, that without a stable government, they will not know how to run the country in wartime. And that we need that stable government before they can even consider running the country with or without the Taliban. So what we see, ladies and gentlemen, is that today, this debate comes down to when we can leave Afghanistan. The end goal must be to leave Afghanistan. But we believe that until their government can work without the Taliban, before they can work stably and keep their country together, we cannot possibly leave Afghanistan. So for the reasons I've stated, for the reason my partner has stated, we firmly believe that this resolution, this House believes that it is time for Afghanistan to govern independently of Western intervention, shall and surely must fall. Thank you.